All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. And on this edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast, I have the privilege of being joined by the one and the only from the Kitchen Sink Podcast. And of course, I could be speaking none other than Marc Jenkins. Marc, how you doing today?
Doing good, Will. How's it going, man?
I cannot complain one bit, my man. It's like, we got plenty to discuss on this one about a very hot topic going on in collegiate athletics right now. And of course, that is Pac-12 expansion. Wow, things have changed very quickly because you think about it a year ago, all of us were having a conversation saying, you know what, RIP to the Pac 12. The Conference of Champions wasn't going to exist anymore. And granted, it's still not the same Conference of Champions, but this conference has life because everybody thought, you know what, we're just going to pack up and fold up shop and go about our business. And Oregon State and Washington State said, you know what, not so fast. And, you guys wanted to leave. You gave your notice. We don't want to leave. We want to rebuild this conference. And lo and behold, we've seen Washington State and Oregon State, to their credit, stick to their guns. I mean, I do know that there was an attempt on their part to get into the Big 12 conference. The Big 12 said no. But now they're taking some of that war chest, if you will, the holdover that they have, the money from the Pac-12, and they've started cherry picking who they want. And now you've got Fresno State, you've got Boise State, you've got Colorado State, and you've got San Diego State, and clearly the Pac-12 or the Pac-6 or the six pack, whatever you want to call them, they're not going to stop there because they need at least two more to make eight to be recognized as a conference by the NCAA. The NCAA clearly gave them that 2-year waiver. So they've got four teams on board from the Mountain West, and they are not stopping right there. This has become very interesting, very quick, and we're going to be talking about this a lot more because it's now just a matter of seeing who else is going to be on board with this new league.
Yeah, man. I mean, first and foremost, shout out to the ADs and everyone on staff at Oregon State and Washington State because you've got to have like some serious stones to just go ahead and say, hey, we're going to tough it out. Like we're going to hear all the jokes about us being Pac 2 and everything, and we're just going to stick this out and rebuild where we're the cornerstone of this brand new conference. So I think that's amazing for them. That kind of goes into when you think about really having a belief in something and a dream in something and sticking to it. And now it's kind of beginning to come to fruition for them. And to me, honestly, I think it's a little bit quicker than I thought it would be. I thought that they would struggle this year to get any commitments, and I didn't think that they would get a commitment, from anyone until the following season, until the 2025 season. So, it's amazing what they're doing, and whoever I'm not sure, is the commissioner still the same for the pack? Did they get like a whole new?
Absolutely not. And,
Okay,
and I'm happy that you said that because Teresa Gold is the commissioner going forward from the Pac-12. And, Teresa Gold has only been on the job for a couple of months, and she has done a better job than Larry Scott and George Kliakoff combined during their respective tenures. You think about it, and she said this from the jump. She's here to do what's in the best interest of Oregon State and Washington State. And how often have we not heard conference commissioners, say that? You think about it. Larry Scott was an outsider when he was brought in, and his claim to fame was the Pac-12 network, and it was kind of like, well, you've made your network more exclusive, and most people around the country can't see it. And he did a bad job as the Pac-12 commissioner, and then George Kliakoff came in and he just said, you know what, hold my beer, and and that's all he did. I mean, George Kliakoff came in and he was basically running a fool's errand, trying to save the Pac-12. You know, it all started where I forgot which school that's no longer in the Pac-12. Basically, a professor there or a dean or somebody said, "Hey, you know what? We are worth 50 million per school," and then the Pac-12 expected to get that in a TV deal, and it never came to fruition. And of course, at that point, you know, that was kind of like the beginning of the end. You know, USC sat back and said, "Hey, we're USC. Why are we only getting 15, 20 million a year where you have schools like Vanderbilt who just happen to be in the same region and happen to be in the SEC, they're getting more than we are." So
Right.
USC is looking at that like, hey, you know, we want our dough. And it was kind of like this league could have been salvaged, but you know, Brett Yormark, the current commissioner of the Big 12, he did his part, you know, nudging Colorado and Utah and others while they were still, you know, Pac-12 schools. And, you know, there was a streaming deal in place. Oregon and Washington, they wanted no parts of it. And here we are. And now you have, you know, Oregon State and Washington State. They stuck to their guns, like you said, man.
Yeah.
And it's one of those, I'm looking at this, I'm wondering if Cal and Stanford are having second thoughts because Cal and Stanford could have been there working with Oregon State and Washington State. But I think that they just pushed the panic button too quick because I really do think
Hmm.
they expected the Pac-12 to dissolve. And
Yeah.
and
I
and
think
it,
everybody did.
yeah,
When all the craziness started happening, when the SCs and the UCLAs started to make their moves, the writing on the wall were, okay, everything's about to collapse and crumble now. So, like you said, Cal and Stanford, schools that are more known for their academics than they are athletics. Like,
mhm.
granted, they have decent programs in certain sports, but once they saw all the big boys kind of running for the hills, they're like, "Holy crap, what are we going to do? Like, we've got to figure something out."
Well, I mean, especially for Cal and Stanford, especially Stanford. We're not just talking about an athletic program. They have Olympic
Yeah,
sports.
yeah,
I mean, you think about it, every single year or every 4 years rather, when the Summer Olympics roll around, most of the athletes representing the United States, they were with Pac-12 schools, most notably
hmm,
USC, UCLA, Cal, and Stanford, just right there in that state. So they were looking at it from the financial standpoint, but the holdup with them now, they're not getting a full share of the ACC money, and they're
yep,
not they're not even getting 50%. Okay, and we might be talking about the ACC in a different vein in a couple of years, depending on how the legal proceedings go with Clemson and Florida State in their battle to
right,
try to get out of that league. So, because if that happens, game on. Because if you're Cal and Stanford, hypothetically speaking, I really felt like Cal and Stanford said, "Hey, you know what? We're going to get into the Big Ten." And the Big Ten said no. And as big and powerful as the Big Ten is, I think that was a mistake on their part, not taking on Cal and Stanford, because
oh,
to
yeah,
me, it's like, okay, you already took Los Angeles with USC and UCLA. You got the Seattle market with Washington. You have a football power in Oregon. And of course, you know, Phil Knight just gives them a blank check for whatever they need.
right,
You would have had the Bay Area as well with Cal and Stanford. Then I think it would have added to the Big Ten's academia reputation as well
big time.
to take on those two institutions, and they chose not to. I think that was a mistake on their part. Cal and Stanford, I think they pushed the panic button. At some point, I think they come back to the West Coast. I think if we're talking about all of the 10 schools that left the Pac-12 last year,
Mhm.
I think of all of those 10, I think the ones that are set up to come back to the West Coast would be Cal and Stanford because I look at it like this. SC is not coming back because I mean the Big Ten money is ridiculous. And I said it was over for everybody else once that move went down because you figure now the Big Ten has the three biggest media markets in the country in their back pocket. And I said from last year, a couple of years ago rather, I said they're going to be able to walk into any network office and say, "Hey, let's talk turkey." And now, what does the Big Ten have? They have CBS, they have NBC, and they have Fox. Okay,
Yep.
um, Colorado, I think Colorado is better suited for the Big 12. Arizona and Arizona State are always going to be a package deal because of the border regions, for the state of Arizona. But I mean, you look at UCLA, they went along with USC. Um, for UCLA, they thought they were going to be hemorrhaging cash. They're not because they've had a deficit athletically for the last couple of years anyway. And then because of the California border regions, they have to give Berkeley 10 million. So they're not getting a full cut from the ACC, but they're still getting money from UCLA because they're basically sister schools, so to speak.
Right.
But yeah, I think it was a huge gamble from Cal and Stanford. I think they're going to regret it if they're not regretting it already because I know somebody personally, okay, who played baseball at Temple, and he played baseball at Temple after Temple joined the American Athletic Conference. And I asked him how it was, and he said it was hell because this is the thing people don't understand when it comes to travel for collegiate athletics,
Yep.
football and basketball, they get a la carte. You know what I'm saying? You're going to be on a plane, going cross country. You're going to have a bus meeting you at the airport to take you to and fro. If you're playing track, or if you're running track rather, or you're playing baseball or like softball or whatever like that, your travel amenities are not the same. And I could
Oh,
tell you,
terrible.
I could tell you from my college days, you know, taking those bus trips, up and down the East Coast, the Northeast, it was fine because it was within 3 to 4 hours. But if you're talking about being on a bus for like more than 6 or 7 hours, it ain't fun. Okay.
No.
And then you still got to go to school and do all of that stuff. And I think a lot of those kids, in those sports are feeling it. And it's one of those they've reached out to the folks at their respective schools. But, of course, those people don't see that because they see the money. And I'm gonna turn it right back over
That's
to
it.
you in just a moment. I was just gonna say this last part right here. At least from what we've seen so far from Oregon State and Washington State as they're looking to rebuild this league, they've kept it within that region. You bring in Fresno State, so that's Northern California. San Diego State, of course, Southern California. Boise State out in Idaho, and then Colorado State, out there in Fort Collins. So everything is still within the region. It's going to expand beyond that, I truly do believe. But I think that right there is a step in the right direction as well.
No, absolutely. And just to kind of backtrack to your point about Cal and Stanford, coming back home, so to speak, I definitely see that happening in the cards because they're going to come to a realization that it's just not worth it for them to put their student athletes in those situations constantly with the travel. You know, the swim team. Nobody's going to roll out a Learjet for the swim team to get to, their next meet. And the crazy thing about it is, like you said, a lot of those Olympic athletes come from, Stanford specifically. A lot of those aquatic sports are, dominated by Stanford athletes. So here it is, these Olympic athletes, so to speak, are asked to be bused from California to Michigan for an event or maybe a train ride or something. And that's just a lot to ask of these student athletes to put them in uncomfortable situations. Do you know what the length of the deal was for them? Is it a 5-year deal? Is it a 7-year deal? Does it have maybe some type of like buyout clause after 3 or something?
In regards to Cal and Stanford with the
Yeah,
ACC,
yeah.
I think it runs through 2036. And
Wow.
but basically what a lot of people in the industry are holding their breath on is, this whole thing with Florida State and Clemson. And I really, from what I'm reading, the tea leaves at least, you know, Oregon State and Washington State were kind of interested in seeing what happened with the ACC, but they clearly can't wait that long
Right.
because it's one of those where if Clemson and Florida State win their cases, it's game on because
Mhm.
basically, you know, the SEC, they've basically come out and said that they don't want Florida State. And honestly, you see the writing on the wall. They really don't because as of right now, they don't want another mouth to feed. And they feel like Florida State doesn't bring any value to them from the standpoint that they already have a Florida school. Florida doesn't want them in the SEC right now.
Right.
But you've got Virginia and North Carolina that want to get into the SEC. Okay, you have a Clemson that wants to get out, Basically, the ACC bringing in Cal, Stanford, and SMU, it was kind of a buffer for whether or not they do lose Clemson and Florida State. And then you had three schools that were desperate to get into a power conference because Cal and Stanford were like, well, they were worried about, do we get left out in the cold? And then if you're SMU, you've taken 3 decades to get back to a power conference. I mean, you think about it, Rice has never recovered. Rice was in that old Southwest Conference. Rice never recovered. TCU just got back into a power conference after all of those years. So, basically the big boys in the power conference, Arkansas, A&M, and Texas, they were always going to be good. But, SMU was desperate to get back in. So I think that's why they took it. And of course, they really wanted to be in the Big 12, but the Big 12 said no because you had schools within the Big 12 that didn't want another Texas school. So
Right.
getting back to Cal and Stanford, they just kind of, they were kind of desperate. And it's kind of like, you know what, you're starving and you're in a car and you have a hot dog and it's like, your mom is telling you, listen, if you could just hold out for like 30 more minutes, we can sit down and have a legit meal. And by the time you get to the restaurant where it's like chicken parm or like a steak or something like that, your appetite's spoiled because you couldn't hold it. And that's
Yeah.
basically what Cal and Stanford have done. Because, in my opinion, I think whatever TV deal the new Pac-12 gets, it's clearly not going to be up there with like
No.
an ACC or a Big 12. But it's going to be better than what the Mountain West is getting from the standpoint that Boise and these other schools jump ship. Okay,
Right.
so just for the sake of argument, you have those four schools coming in from the Mountain West. You add Cal and Stanford to that mix with Oregon State and Washington State. I think it would add a couple of $1 million a piece to
Mhm.
whatever TV deal that you would get. But like I said, they just simply push the panic button.
Yeah, I'm just curious to see if maybe they can get some type of like early buyout clause to get out of that deal and get back over there sooner than later. Regardless to what happens with the Florida State Clemson deal. But we'll see as far as that's concerned. But another thing I think too is I see them trying to get with them surprisingly getting those four schools to commit this year to come into the conference. I see them next year going on the hunt and trying to add another 2 to 4 and trying to round this thing out to a solid 10.
Oh, definitely. And I honestly, I don't think he's going to take that long because they're they're acting quick, and I do believe that there are other schools reaching out to the Pac-12. Um, some people are saying, well, why didn't um, Oregon State and Washington State take San Jose State because, of the Silicon Valley aspect or like the Bay Area aspect, rather, should I say, as well as UNLV. The thing is, I think they were, and I think they're going to continue to be strategic as far as like their payouts because you figure 18 million a piece for the four schools that they're paying to the Mountain West. That's 72 plus the poaching fees and all that other stuff. I think it comes up to 111. They
Mhm.
have $250 million to play with. I'm sure they're not just going to spend all of it just to be spending it. But I think now that they have four schools aligned with them, it makes them seem more viable. And now you're having schools reach out to them because the other schools in the Mountain West are like, well, wait a minute, what about us? Because you hear these talks, and they're legit talks about the American Athletic Conference going after Air Force because from their mindset, they want to put all of the service academies in the same league. They already have Navy, they already have Army, and then you would have Air Force as well. So Air Force might be out. That would leave the Mountain West with seven, and you're hearing about Sacramento State wants to come up to the FBS level, as does North Dakota State
Mhm.
as
They
well.
deserve it.
Yeah, because I mean, listen, they dominate up there. So,
Absolutely.
but I think like what some of these schools are looking at is saying like, hey, we might be able to get a better deal if we align ourselves with these guys, and especially because you're hearing the talks, and I think where there's smoke, there's fire. As far as the Pac-12 looking to add Tulane and Memphis, because I think what Oregon State and Washington State are doing is they're sitting back and they're learning from the mistakes that destroyed the original Pac-12. What hurt the original Pac-12 was they kind of felt like they were above having to expand because, we're the Pac-12, we just focus on the West Coast.
Yep.
Nowadays, with conferences, it's not about regions, unfortunately. It's
Not at all.
about it's about the markets, and what is going to bring you value. So if you're the Pac-6 right now, you're going to sit back and say, which one of these schools can bring us the best value market-wise and can also give us a competitive aspect? And they're looking at Tulane and Memphis, and I really do think that Tulane and Memphis will be in the new Pac-12. And I'll say this about Memphis. I think both the Big 12 and the ACC made a mistake in not adding them. I really do.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they're definitely pretty solid football program. They're getting better and better as it goes on. And their basketball program is always going to be, one of the top 40, 50 in the country every season. So anytime you have a chance to get a hold of a university that is plus in both the money sports, why not pull the trigger and do it? So that's going to come back to bite them on the butt. And that would be a huge addition for the Pac-12. Like that right there kind of almost puts their basketball back on the map because you look at the other schools, not really super strong in basketball. San Diego State's got a pretty good basketball program there. Colorado State, I mean, forget about it. That pretty much nothing there. You know,
Boy,
Washington
Boise,
State can
Bo,
be
Bo,
good sometimes.
Boise's made the tournament a couple of times in recent years.
Yeah, they're getting a little bit better too. So, but that Memphis deal and Tulane's pretty solid in
Right,
basketball as well too.
right.
But Memphis having them there now, we're talking again, like I said, a top 40 type school every year in basketball. Now you've got them to throw into the mix to kind of lead that conference from a basketball standpoint.
Listen, definitely. And honestly, I know that, they took four from the Mountain West, but, if that league, isn't able to sustain itself, I really do think they circle back to UNLV because you look, pardon me, you look at how Vegas, is growing as a sports mecca because, and I say that from the standpoint that, for years, professional sports avoided Las Vegas, from the gambling aspect. And now, they're embracing them. We have an NHL franchise there. Unfortunately, we're going to have an MLB franchise there. That's a whole nother story for another day. We have an NFL franchise there. WrestleMania is going to
WNBA, yeah.
WNBA. You know what I'm saying?
UFC is always having events like crazy there.
Fight night for boxing is crazy. You know, recently the Pac-12 had their championship game there. So I think they're going to circle back and bring in UNLV. And I think what they're
I
going to
love
need,
that.
yeah, and just to piggyback off of that, the other thing I think that should happen with that is that I think that their conference championship game should be there. I think basketball wise, their conference tournament should be there because if you're going to do this thing, you need to do it right and you have to think big because even with the original Pac-12, once they added a conference championship game, I think they did themselves a disservice for the first 4 or 5 years of that conference championship game, having it on campus. You're too
Yep.
big of a league to not have it at a neutral site like the SEC, the Big Ten, the Big 12, and others. I think this time around, you definitely have to do that. You definitely have to embrace that. But I really do think they got to circle back and add UNLV. I think maybe, Wyoming, which is a Mountain West holdover, could be on their horizon as well. San Jose State. And then I'm going to throw another program out there that is fast rising. And it also, from a market aspect as well, could possibly help the Pac-12. That's UTSA.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I could see that too. And again, they're a pretty solid basketball program, also not a top 40, every year, but they make the tournament every couple of years.
Hmm.
So, they constantly have an influx of good basketball, kids there. And I think that, the more that now, if you attach this Pac-12 conference name to these schools, obviously they're going to get better recruits, which is only going to strengthen that. Like these kids, a lot of times they're picking these schools not only because of what the school is, but also the conference the school's in.
Right.
Because guess what? More scouts are going to be at these games because there's a higher level of talent. So, hey, maybe I wasn't on anybody's list to make the NFL or make the NBA, but now all of a sudden, a couple of extra scouts are seeing me because I'm in this conference, and now I've got a shot to be a 6th round pick or a 7th round pick and get into the league. Maybe now I've got a shot to be an undrafted rookie free agent in the NBA and maybe stick somewhere if I find the right situation. So, I think that them, with that Pac 12 name, because the Pac 12, obviously, right now, with them being weakened and trying to rebuild and restructure, they're not the same. But if you just go to the average sports fan who doesn't really dive deep into collegiate athletics, you ask them like the big conferences, they're still going to say SEC, Big 12, Big 10, ACC, and the Pac 12. We're still going to name it like it's still one of those Power Five, even though it's not. And I think that them attracting the right size schools in the right that have the right sports backgrounds is only going to bring the Pac 12 back to where it was in some way.
Yeah, because I mean, you look at it, and this is why I thought from the jump, I thought a reverse merger could have worked. And then I've
Mhm.
heard it directly from some people that are alums out there at Oregon State. And they say, listen, we wanted no parts of that because
Mhm.
we are a power conference school.
Mhm.
Okay. And don't get me wrong, no disrespect to the Mountain West, but from top to bottom, it's not a strong league. Okay,
No.
you do have some good programs there, yes, but not everybody. And I thought about it from the standpoint that I said it could work because I said, hey, you got all of these kids on the West Coast. Everybody's not going to want to travel cross country to compete. I'm like, yeah, the 5-star kids and the 4-star kids, maybe, but guess what? If you're a 3-star kid from the West Coast, like if you're a Southern California kid, you could still go in the Mountain West to compete because, hey, you had a Fresno State, you had a
Mhm.
San Jose State, you had a San Diego State, just in California alone. Uh, but they're not doing that. And let me rephrase that. They are doing it, but you can see the writing on the wall that this thing is going to expand somewhat east. Okay,
Mhm.
how far east? We have to we got to wait and see to survive. But I think they've strategically positioned themselves in a good spot because it's not just the Mountain West. You have some of these other schools from some of these other power leagues that are going to say, "Hey, wait a minute, let's get on board." And the reason is, if the Pac-12 gets the right teams, the right schools to join, they could, de facto, in a way, position themselves to get an automatic bid, if you will, every year for the college football playoff. And
Yeah.
that's what it's all about because, you know, it kind of looked like that before to
Mhm.
say that the Mountain West was going to be that league that put themselves in that position to kind of get that automatic bid, from the group of five every single year for the playoff. And now they've been taken over, if you will. Because my thing is this, I think what's doing in the Mountain West is the same thing that did in the original Pac-12. And that is that they thought that they were simply too big to fail. It was one
Mhm.
of those where I think they felt that Oregon State and Washington State needed them more than they needed them, Oregon State and Washington State. And it was the other way around. Yes, you had the scheduling agreement in place for this year, but as I'm finding out, a lot of people were not on board with it. A lot of the coaches from the Mountain West weren't a fan of it because they then gave up a conference game because instead of playing 8 conference games this year, you're only playing 7 because basically everybody's playing either Washington State or Oregon State. Then on top of that, this scheduling agreement with the Mountain West was not put in by Teresa Gold. It was put in by George Kliakoff.
Mm.
Okay, that's something else right there because basically once Oregon State and Washington State got control of the Pac-12, first thing they did was tell George Kliakoff to hit the bricks.
Yeah.
Okay, and they wanted Teresa Gold, and Teresa Gold has worked in the Pac-12 for more than 2 decades. She eats, sleeps, and breathes the conference. She understands the West Coast. And it's one of those where, again, like I said before, her thing is I'm doing what's in the best interest of Oregon State and Washington State. And that's something you have not heard for quite some time. So when it's all said and done, um, yeah, they had the scheduling agreement in place, but they didn't want to have to turn around and pay the Mountain West again to do that. And then on top of that, from what I'm hearing, I think it was $14 million that both Oregon State and Washington State paid the Mountain West this year.
Wow.
From what I'm hearing, the Mountain West is looking to try to get more, and Oregon State and Washington State said, you know what, we're not doing that. And then, of course, they turned around and they plucked four of their schools. And again, like I said before, they're not done there. They are really not done there. They're at six. They're going to easily get to eight. And I'm with you. I think once this new league comes to fruition in a little bit less than 2 years now, they're gonna have they're gonna have 10 teams. Maybe they have 12. I don't know, but I think they definitely have at least 10.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing that they're going to have to do that I think going forward, because now we're going to have six teams in that league. They're going to be able to have, each team's going to be able to have those five in conference games, but they're going to really have to do a great job. And this is going to have to be a focus for the commissioner and each AD at each school to really make sure that they're scheduling good out of conference games, because that to me is what's going to make or break the future of their audience, which is then also going to make or break the future of the recruits that they're getting 2, 3, 5 years down the line from now. They're going to have to make sure that they line up some pretty solid opponents for those out of conference scheduled games, because if they're getting a bunch of jobbers like back in the old wrestling days, the Bad News Browns and all of that, if they're getting those type of universities, I mean, come on, what's what's going to happen, man? They got to make sure that it's some ironclad, and it doesn't have to be your Texases or Ohio States of the world. It doesn't have to be Georgia or anything like that, but you better make sure it's not Stephen A. Austin universities and things like that.
And not only that, you can't lose to those schools either.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
I think a building block going forward for this new league. You just look at this past Saturday where Washington State beat Washington, and
Mhm.
I know that
That was
Oregon,
huge.
yeah, I know that Oregon State got it handed to them, courtesy of Oregon, but I think that the win by Washington State kind of trumps that because
Yeah.
you look at everything that Washington State went through. Clearly, Oregon State's going through a lot as well. But then Washington State lost their AD to Washington. Okay.
Right.
Right. You know what I'm saying? And Washington State was kind of like, okay, you know what? It's like those kids, that university, they all took it personal. And they said, you
Mhm.
know what? Hey, we're gonna go out here and we're gonna show you. And it was kind of like you know, a New York Jets beating the Baltimore Colts in Super Bowl III. Yeah, the Jets got the trophy, but the AFL as a league won, and that's the kind of the same thing I saw when Wazoo was able to go out there and knock off Washington. And I think honestly, I know that you get good crowds at Husky Stadium in Seattle. I know that you get good crowds, in Pullman for the Cougars. I would like to see that game played in Seattle at Lumen Field every single year. In my opinion, I don't know if it's going to happen or not.
Right.
But nonetheless, that those are the things you got to go out there and you've got to do. And basically, getting back to Oregon State, it was kind of like they got the death penalty without
Mhm.
getting the death penalty because you think about it, they lost their head coach who was an alum there. He took the
Mhm.
Michigan State job. You lost your quarterback DJU who is starting to look like DJU at Clemson, if not worse at this point with Florida State. You lost your starting running back, Damian Martinez. I think he led the Pac-12 in rushing last year.
Mhm.
He went to Miami. You lost your top linebacker, Easton Mascarenas Arnold, to USC. So basically, you lost your whole squad. And, Oregon State, it's one of those where for both Oregon State and Washington State, it kind of gets lost in the shuffle that they sent their fair share of talent to the NBA. They sent their fair share of talent to the NFL. When I think about some of the guys that came out of Oregon State over the years, I think about Steven Jackson, the running back. I think about, Chad Johnson. I think about TJ Husman Jada, to
Mhm.
say the least. You think about Washington State as well. Clay Thompson. You think about Oregon State's basketball team. Gary Payton Sr., Gary Payton II, AC Green. It's one of those where all of the West Coast kids, weren't maybe theoretically good enough to get into USC or UCLA. You had other options out there, and I think now Oregon State and Washington State, they're going to get back to that. And I think, not to sound too long-winded on this matter, I think the Pac-12 needs to take a page from the Big East
Mhm.
because when the Big East broke up 11 years ago, everybody thought that the basketball schools were done, and they just banded together and they got back to what made that conference famous.
Right.
Football was not what made the Big East famous. It was basketball. And they were like, you know what, we're gonna bring in some other Catholic basketball schools that are
Mhm.
strong enough to help keep this conference going. And you look at the Big East now, 11 years after that, they've won 4 national championships. They've had 5 Final Four appearances. They have a new lucrative basketball deal
Mhm.
in place. And I think this is, what could be in store for the Pac-12. I mean, you look at it, they do have some options on the table because, all right, CBS had to deal with the Mountain West. Okay, and I
Mhm.
think it runs through next year. And they also had Fox. So if you're the Pac-12, you could work with CBS, you could work with Fox, and I'm going to throw two networks out there that I think the big boys kind of glossed over. You look at the CW. The ACC is doing
Yep.
work with the CW right now, and of course, the CW is also working with both Oregon State and Washington State, and I think they're going to continue to do that. And then Turner, because Turner just lost the NBA package,
And
and
they've got some money to spend.
they've got some money to spend. And it's just like, listen, all it takes is a network that wants to get into the party,
Mhm.
and you have a product with what they have. And I think it could work because you figure, all right, in those prime slots on Saturdays, 3:30, 7 o'clock, 7:30 on the East Coast. CBS, they're going to have a Big Ten game now. Okay. I've been saying
Mhm.
it was the SEC for years, but of course, that's not changed. NBC's got their thing with Notre Dame.
Mhm.
Fox is going to be all about the Big 12, at that time. And ABC is going to have an SEC game on there. So if, you know, if you're the Pac-12, you could say, hey, you know what? Let's get a matchup on the CW, or hey, let's get a matchup on Turner. You know what I'm
I
saying?
like the Turner idea a lot, man. You
Yeah.
just bringing that up. I think that's ingenious. I think they seriously need to look into that because here's what that's going to do for them. That's going to open up a couple of things. One, TBS and TNT during those times, they're playing a movie 10, 12, 20 years old.
True.
So you've got open spots. Yep,
Real quick, just to add to that, True TV is a part of that family too.
exactly. That I was going to go there too. So now you've got three network cable options that you could do. And also, in conjunction now with the Max streaming deal, you can also stream stuff via Bleacher Report and stuff like that on that app. So now you're allowing people to get their regular television kind of fix, so to speak, for your product. And you have the ability to have maybe two games on at the same time on two different networks, and then you also have the new media with streaming to have the ability to have this on your phone if you're at the airport or your tablet, iPad, whatever. So I think that's something they seriously need to consider. I think a good plan for them going forward is, like we've said, to add two to four more teams in the upcoming year to round out to a nice 10 would be great. Then from there, making sure that they're really getting that schedule tight, making sure that they've got those 5 conference games there. With the out of conference games, yeah, maybe you get one tomato can, maybe two, like every school has, but then you've got to make sure that you've got every team in your league with a strong game against an SEC team. Maybe not a top 2 or 3 SEC team, but maybe one of those, the fifth best team in the SEC or the sixth best team. Same with the Big Ten. Try to get one of those. So that way you're really getting a good schedule together. And then you top it off with a good deal, a good media deal with Turner. If they can do those 3 things, they're going to be back quicker than anyone expected.
Yeah, because I mean, you look at it. I mean, clearly, and like we're saying this, and of course, we're not going to sit up here and say, well, they're ready to compete with the SEC and Big Ten and Big 12 and ACC. Absolutely not. But they're still going to be in a spot, and they're still positioning themselves for survival because that's the name of the game. Unfortunately, right now with collegiate athletics, it's all about survival, and I think this is why some of these other schools, from the group of five, they're looking at this and saying, hey, listen, can I get in on this? Because you think about it, the American Athletic Conference, they have lost so much due to realignment. You've got UCF, you've got Houston, you've got Cincinnati. They're all in the Big 12. Then, uh, if you wanted to call Rutgers an American Athletic Conference school, they were just kind of there for a cup of coffee. Same thing with Louisville, but it's one of those where it's all about positioning yourself for survival, and it's also trying to get the best possible TV deal that you can get. And I think Teresa Gold is going to get that. I think they have some options on the West Coast, and I think it's not just about, like you said, putting games out there on TV. It's about, trying to make sure that you're putting your best possible matchup on a Saturday to Saturday basis on television. I listen, I know that the money is going to be equal per school, but you still got to go out there and put, your best matchup possible. I mean, yeah, with the Big Ten, you're going to see Northwestern play Rutgers, but that's not going to be in that prime slot on Saturday afternoon on CBS. That's not going to be in that prime slot, Saturday nights on NBC and stuff like that. That's probably like for the Big Ten network. So
Yeah.
it's one of those where, like, okay, if you got to deal with Turner, you want to go make sure that, you go out there and you give them your best possible matchup
Mm-hmm.
on a Saturday to Saturday basis. And I think they can pull it off because, I mean, you look at Boise and what Boise has done as a football program for the last 25 years or so. Same thing
Yep.
could be said with Fresno State. It started with Pat Till. Jeff Tedford was getting them back to that. And unfortunately, Jeff Tedford had to retire for health reasons. And of course, San Diego State was pretty prominent for a while. I think they come back. They've got a new stadium that they have out there in the 619. They just got to get their program back, and they got to get some of those kids that maybe the USC's and the UCLA's or the Big Ten might overlook. And like I said, some of those West Coast kids, all of those West Coast kids, don't want to have to travel across the country per se. So you do have an opportunity there. But for me, I'm looking, also at the Mountain West, and I'm like, well, can they recover from this? Because you're down to 8, possibly 7, like we said, with the Air Force situation, and there's still rumors maybe the Pac-12 goes after Air Force as well, kind of like to have a package deal, if you will, for the Denver market with Colorado State as well. So I'm not sure. So Air Force, Air Force right now is kind of like that pretty girl that's getting courted by both the
Yeah.
captain of the football team and the captain of the basketball team. It's just a matter of who she's going home with.
Right.
But so I'm looking at the Mountain West and I'm like, they've been able to survive before because you
Yeah.
figure they lost BYU, they lost Utah, they lost TCU. The next step, could be bringing up a Montana and a North Dakota State from the FCS level. I think it comes down to whether or not everybody, wants to work to make this happen. There's also a possibility of, bringing New Mexico State into the Mountain West as well. I mean, granted, New Mexico State is not that strong, but at least, you would have the in-state rivalry with the Lobos of New Mexico. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Mountain West makes this work. But like I said before, um, it's one of those where I think that the Mountain West made a big mistake saying, "Hey, we're too big to fail." And I really felt like they thought that Washington State and Oregon State needed them more than they needed Washington State and Oregon State, and I think it has finally hurt them.
Yeah. Anytime these mid-major conferences, try to, walk around with their chest poked out like they're a Power Five school, it always comes to bite them in the butt because the Power Five schools can always poach your league. It's almost impossible for you to poach their leagues. And if you do, you're literally getting the lowest hanging fruit of them all. So I think they do survive also. And I think that, I think the only way they can do it, and you're right, is by elevating some of these FBS schools. I think that's the only way. They've got to seriously, if I'm them, I really take a look at the playoffs and see who are the four best schools and make offers to those four. Probably won't get all four, but even if you can get two, now you're surviving.
Well, I think they could get four, and I'll tell you why. Because just like Oregon State and Washington State had all of that money to play with, now
Mm-hmm.
the Mountain West has the Pac-12's money to play with. Then on top of that, they're gonna do what to these schools what they did to like Utah and others in the past. They're gonna withhold their share for their last year there. So you figure when it's all said and done, they're probably gonna have close to $150 million to play with. And if you're a Montana, if you're a North Dakota State, and they're basically throwing $20 million at you. You listen, where else are you going to get that type of
Yeah,
money from?
right.
So I definitely think they take it. One thing that's very interesting for me, because some people threw it out there and said, "Hey, maybe this is a time for the Pac-12 to go after Gonzaga," and the Pac-12 said, "No, we're going after football schools." And I think that's what hurt Gonzaga as far as them trying to get into the Big 12. And I think, it's going to, continue to hurt them. And I think they're going to be, stuck, in the West Coast Conference. And it's one of those for me. I look at it and I say, hey, Gonzaga is kind of like the UConn of the West because
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I thought that story was a reach at best a couple of weeks ago. When you heard of UConn trying to get into the Big,
Oh yeah.
and it was basically to the point that the Big 12 was going to have to basically do a GoFundMe to help UConn have a football stadium,
Right.
like in 7 years or so. And then the folks in the Big 12 are like, yeah, no, we're good. So it's just like, I mean, but again, getting back to the Pac-12, they simply have a plan. And this is something that we have not heard from this league in a dog's age. They actually have a plan for something. And this is why I think it's going to work.
Yeah. Yeah. I really like I said, what they're doing. I'm really interested to see who the next handful of schools that they, approach to join the league is going to be because I think that right there can determine how quickly this takes off and also how much money they could possibly get from a Turner. I really think I think that that's so huge. TNT, TBS, Turner, they've got the money to spend right now. They are so in their feelings right now about losing the NBA, and they've got to do something with that money. I don't see them just relying on baseball and the NCAA tournament. I see them having to make another move somewhere.
Well, they have the NHL, and they got the
Okay,
NH
yeah, yeah,
and they,
yeah.
so, and they got the NHL on the cheap. And the other thing that I think does happen is because with the new Big East media deal, they're gonna have CBS still.
Mm,
No, 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 no. I take that back. They're not gonna be with CBS. It's going to be Fox, and then it's going to be Turner. I think
oh, okay.
I I don't think that a CBS is part of the new deal with the Big East. I don't think so. Definitely Fox, and I think secondly is Turner. And from what I was my understanding was a lot of that deal came to play out as far as like UConn status because they want UConn, and I think like one because
Mm,
I think like the one of the first marquee games for this upcoming men's college basketball season for the Big East. And right out of the chute, I think it's UConn and St. John's because, of
mm,
course, Connecticut, the two-time defending national champions, St.
mm.
John's is expected to be a tournament team this year, especially with
Yeah,
Rick Pitino as their coach. So I think what probably could happen is, the inside the NBA guys, I think they're going to segue kind of to the college thing, which isn't bad, because if you've listened to Charles Barkley and Kenny Smith and Reggie Miller and those guys, granted, I think Reggie's probably going to be gone when this deal is up with them. It's going to suck, but
mm.
nonetheless, just having those guys, still talking basketball and stuff like that, I think would be is going to be good for them, and I think something similar to that with the Pac-12 if they get a deal. But I think it could happen because again, you got networks out there, that want, football. And the bottom line is people watch football,
Yeah.
okay, more than any other sport. Okay. And the thing is, I've always been intrigued by college football since I was knee high to a street curb, okay? But nonetheless, I think now more than ever, I think people are really intrigued by football. And if this new Pac-12 can position themselves to be the best non-power league, and like we said, if they can go out there and put that quality product forward and give you um a glimpse of something, I think it definitely works because, I mean, put it like this, the Mountain West has always had a quality product because if they
Mhm.
didn't have a quality product, the power leagues would not have been looking to poach their top schools. And
Yeah.
this ain't the first time that this happened. It ain't going to be the last time either. Okay. So that just gives you an idea. And I mean, you think about what Boise's program, for an example, has been able to do over the last 30 years or so. They've gone from D2 to the Big West, to the Western Athletic Conference, now to the Mountain West, and now pretty soon to the Pac-12. People are intrigued by it. Kids are intrigued by going up there and playing on Smurf turf, and of course,
Oh yeah.
Boise State, this side of Oregon, probably has the most uniform combos, out there. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So it's one of those where I truly do think this thing can work, man.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned the Smurf turf too, because I read an article, I want to say probably 3 or 4 years ago, and this kind of blew my mind where it said like the average non adamant college football like viewer, so to speak, that person watched an extra 7 to 10 minutes of Boise State's games than other games because they were so intrigued just because of the field.
Listen, this is the thing. When you're not in Alabama, when you're not a USC, when you're not a Texas and like other blue bloods, you've got to go out there and do different things to kind of you know get eyes on
Yeah.
your product. I mean, you think about Virginia Tech and the whole Enter Sandman thing. Listen, you think about Oregon football and where it was maybe 35 years ago or so. eyes were not on Oregon like it is now. I mean, you figure out there at Outson Stadium, it's about a little bit less than 60,000 to come, for a home game. But you got the duck riding the cycle. Phil Knight, like I said, huge supporter of Oregon's program. And what put Oregon on the map was the fact that, like, hey, you never knew what those kids are going to be wearing every Saturday.
Yeah.
And like, yo, you figure how many kids have they gotten, to go to Eugene and play there just off the strength of that? You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
not only the gear, but also they've got the freshest cleats. They've got the
Everything.
straight, yeah, just straight from the factory. Like
Ev-
so,
Listen, like, I mean, I think about it. I'm like, if Oregon qualified for the Rose Bowl or Oregon qualified for the playoff, you knew that they were going to get a brand new everything.
oh
Okay,
yeah,
so but like my point is, you got to do other things to go out there and put eyes on your school. And
mhm,
it's all about being on TV, but it's all about what you can do to keep those eyes focused. And I mean, that blue turf does something for Boise. Like I said, their uniform combos, do something for them as well.
mhm,
So yeah, it's all about marketing yourself. And I think this new Pac-12, they understand it. And now, since they brought in San Diego State, Fresno, Colorado State, and Boise, it's all six of them working together. So
mhm.
now they're going to work together to handpick the next several schools that they have come on board. And I really, you're hearing stuff about Tulane and Memphis. It's going to happen. Okay. There's no
Mhm.
ifs, ands, or buts for me because I do think if you're Tulane or Memphis, it's your best option because you're not getting into a powers conference. And I really do think that they circle back to UNLV. When this new Pac-12 debuts, I would be highly surprised if UNLV is not a part of that mix. Okay, maybe they're not, but I would really be surprised that they're not. But I think what they're doing is very smart because they're being strategic. They've never approached this from a desperation aspect because whenever you're desperate, you make mistakes.
Yep.
And the way that they're looking is if Oregon State and Washington State, like, hey, these other schools were our quote unquote friends. We worked with them for 100 years because you think about it, going back to when it was a Pac-8, Oregon State and Washington State were a part of that. You know what I'm saying? So they are looking at it from the next 100 years or so. And it's kind of like, Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. And
Yep.
I think the fact that they stuck their feet in the ground and said, hey, we're going to make this league work. I think it opened up eyes, and now that they have people on board with them, it's opening up more eyes. And just like it is with the recruiting with the kids and what you do for your product on a Saturday to Saturday basis, I think now Oregon State and Washington State are going to be able to recruit more schools. And I think when it's all said and done, they will put themselves in a prime position to be the best non power league. And it's
Mhm.
one of those where I'm saying that now because the ACC, I don't care what anybody says, is unstable. Everybody's going to come in and kind of cherry pick that league,
Yep.
when that day comes. Oregon State and Washington State have now positioned themselves to be a part of that mix as well.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And when that does happen, it's really going to be interesting to see what school goes where, if they try to realign some schools that have been, misplaced, so to speak, conference-wise with, geographic locations to see if they're going to try to do that, maybe try to reinstate some old rivalries that maybe have gone by the wayside due to realignment. It's going to be really fun to watch that whole situation unfold.
And for me, my final question for you is this. Do you think that this realignment in college football will ever stop?
No, no, I think that college football, college sports, period, right now is kind of like the Wild West in the fact that there's movement all across the board. The transfer portal opening up with players being able to move, schools just being able to move and pick up and go as they choose. So much more now. I mean, if you think about it, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we saw a team move, two teams move here or there sporadically. Now, every off season, so to speak, we're hearing of massive exoduses happening all across the board. So I think that this is just the beginning. I wouldn't be surprised if 10, 15 years from now, everything's all shuffled up again.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to continuously happen, unfortunately, because the thing is, there's no leadership because
Yeah.
the NCAA provides zero leadership. And the thing is, collegiate athletics is desperately in need of a commissioner. And I've been
Mm-hmm.
saying this for the longest time. Collegiate athletics needs revenue sharing. But the thing is, good luck getting school administrators at one school to say, hey, let me take away from my budget to
Nope.
go help you out. They're definitely not going to do that. It's not going to be
Absolutely.
like we see at the pro level because revenue sharing at the pro level was put in place for the betterment of the leagues. Okay. These guys are just simply going out there as their job to see who, like, where can I get the top dollar for my product from? And, sometimes it doesn't fit. I mean, I'll look at it, I'll tell you like this. You think about all of those old Big East schools that left the Big East to go to the ACC.
Mhm.
What have they done? Is the
Nope.
is the paycheck worth it? I mean, you think about it. In the Big East and when they were an independent, Miami's football program was a national power. What has
Mhm.
Miami done since they were in the Big East? I
I
mean,
look at Pitt.
yeah, Pitt.
That, look at Pitt. Pitt was great in not only football but basketball also, and
Yes,
now they're just middle of the road.
right. And Pitt basketball wise benefited from being in the Big East. Why? Because it was like, listen, they were still able to recruit New York. More
Mm-hmm.
importantly, they were still able to recruit New York's Catholic League. Okay.
Yep.
And the same thing with Syracuse. I think with the exception of Syracuse's first year in the ACC, every single time that they've gone to the NCAA tournament, they've been a double digit seed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And when you thought about Syracuse, when they were in the Big East, anywhere between a 1 through a 5 seed for the most part, once the NCAA tournament rolled around. Boston College, what have they done? And
Yeah,
we
it's another one. Yeah.
right. And we can go right down the list. So my thing is like the grass is not always greener. And it's just like, you go and you just see the money, so to speak, and you think that you're gonna be okay. I think and I hate to say this, okay, I think UCLA is going to struggle athletically in the Big Ten.
Oh yeah.
I truly do. UCLA jumped ship because they were broke, but you figure UCLA cannot sell out the Rose Bowl, and they haven't done it for well over 20 years, okay? Because
Mm-hmm.
anytime that UCLA has a sellout at the Rose Bowl, it's because they're playing USC, and you have more maroon T-shirts and hoodies in the stands than anything else. I mean, I look at UCLA had a nationally televised game this past Saturday night. It was their official welcome to the Big Ten. They hosted Indiana,
Mm-hmm.
and the Rose Bowl was like half empty. Okay, and then
Jeez.
UCLA got blown out in that game. And I'm old enough to remember when like UCLA had a consistent top 15, top 20 football team. They no longer have that. I mean, you look at their basketball program. The basketball program. I mean, listen. When you think about UCLA players that went to the NBA, UCLA players in the Hall of Fame, it's kind of like a who's who, but it's like,
Yeah.
the last ones at this point are probably like, Darren Collison, Kevin Love, and Russell Westbrook.
Yeah.
And
If
how
you
long
think
ago?
about if you think about UCLA's basketball program, you've got you had a little slight resurgence a couple of years ago, a slight, but now nothing, and we probably won't see anything for another 10 years. Jaquez and Juice saying those guys able to take them to a couple of Final Four runs and things like that, but they're going to go right back to where they were for that period of time where after Love, Westbrook, and Collison, you had nothing for 15 years. And I see them going right back to that. It's amazing that, usually a school, if they struggle in one, if they're good in both and then they struggle in one, they're able to maintain the other sport. it's funny and it's sad also that they just basically lost their grip on their basketball and football programs simultaneously.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those where when it comes to the realignment, it has it's got to make sense. I mean, I think football wise, USC is going to be okay in the Big Ten because
Yeah.
they're USC and they got Lincoln Riley. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
I think Oregon and Washington are going to be okay,
Yeah.
but from a strategic standpoint, the Big Ten and the SEC they're going after heavyweights in the sport because the SEC brought in Texas, they brought in Oklahoma. Yeah, it expands your SEC a little bit, but it fits because now you've got Texas and Texas A&M back in the same conference. And of course, the SEC is kind of like set the trend as far, and this is going back years, probably like at least 25 years, where hey, we're giving you a top 25 matchup, at least one,
Mm-hmm.
okay, every single Saturday. And you think even before the college football playoff, when it was the BCS era, the SEC championship game was kind of like the de facto. It was like a de facto playoff game because the winner was going to the BCS championship and the loser was going home. And then with the 14 playoff, it was like okay, the winner's getting in, and even the loser might still get in. So
Right.
now, and of course, that trend is only going to continue. But like with the Big 12, when the Big 12 started adding teams, it's kind of like you know what if I'm gonna invite you to my crib and like I'm gonna make you a meal, yo, all right, you know what, Mark, I'm gonna make you some fried pork chops and I'm gonna scramble some eggs and I'm gonna feed it in a salad, in a Caesar salad and give it to you. And I'm like, okay, the pork chops are a good meal by themselves. The eggs are a good meal by themselves. The Caesar salad is a good meal by itself, but they don't work together. And it's
Right.
just like, listen, yeah, the Big 12 is adding schools, but I'm like, okay, how many people want to stay up and watch Cincinnati play Arizona State? Or how many
Right.
people want to sit up there and watch, you know, UCF take on K State? They just don't. I'm like, if you're gonna do it, and this is why I think it can work for the new Pac-12. You've got to be strategic with it. You can't just sit up there and add schools just for the purpose of saying, "Hey, we're adding schools." You know what I'm
Right.
saying? So, and this is where I think like some of these leagues, have kind of got caught like got they've just gotten greedy and just like maybe doing things blindfolded. I don't know, but
Right.
at least there does appear to be a plan in place with this Pac-12, and that again, that's why I think it works. The realignment thing, again, it just comes down to money. And like these guys, these school administrators, especially now in the age of the NIL, they're just going to be chasing the dollar. That's all it comes
Yep.
down to.
Yeah. And the good point that you made is, this stuff having to make sense, the schools having to make sense with the conference. I just thought about this, and this is going to be really curious to see as the Big Ten season unfolds. Big Ten football to me, I'm quite sure to you and many people who are listening, Big Ten football is power football, rough and tough, running down the gut, defensive football. And Oregon, USC, those schools do not play that brand of football at all. They are more spread offense, open, running formation, just really all about putting 40, 50 points up on the board where, a good Big Ten game is freaking 17-14 with, terrible weather and great defense throughout. So I'm really curious to see how once they really get into the nitty gritty of conference play, how that's going to affect those flashier schools.
Well, I mean, you look at it like this. I mean, like in November, it gets cold in Eugene, it gets cold in Seattle. I mean, SC, they've had to make those late season trips up to Pullman, and Corvallis and and whatnot. I think they're going to be okay because SC they got to travel to the big house this Saturday to take on Michigan. I don't think USC is going to beat Michigan as bad as Texas just did a couple of
Mm.
weeks ago. But nonetheless, I think SC is going to win because they do have a better team. But it's one of those where with the expanded Big Ten, some of those schools are never going to compete for a championship. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Listen, you're not going to see Northwestern make the win the Big Ten. Maryland, Minnesota,
no,
all the listen.
Rutgers, yeah,
No, listen. It's going to be USC. It's going to be Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan State. Oregon, the big boys. Okay, and it's the
yeah.
same. It's the same thing with the SEC. Listen, you figure if you see Vanderbilt get to Atlanta for the SEC championship game, something went wrong. Or I'm
Somebody's
not.
getting fired.
Look, a lot of people are getting fired. Okay, it ain't happening. You know what I'm saying? So it's one of those where at least I think with this new Pac-12, everybody is going to be on equal footing. Everybody's going to get a chance to compete, and I
Yep.
think that to me is the biggest thing. And then, like I said, they're not going to be able to keep all of the kids home. But
No.
if they can keep some of those kids home from the West Coast, I think that would definitely be a huge step in the right direction for them.
Oh yeah, like you said, those 3-star kids, maybe even some of those fringe 4-star kids, keep them
Right.
home and
Yeah.
build that league.
Yeah. But as we're getting ready to time out, how are things over at the Kitchen Sink podcast and what's on tap, my man?
Oh, things are going good, man. Just balancing a show, and I think I told you I'm also doing like in school for voiceover stuff, and that's been draining a lot of the time, man. I just finished up doing my demo
Okay.
for I had a writer actually write 6 scripts for me.
Okay.
So did a demo. An engineer is gonna put all the bells and whistles and noises behind it. So it's a BMW ad, Wells Fargo ad, Hidden Valley Ranch, Jersey Mike's, Juvenile Diabetes Research Fund, and Crest. Those are the 6 commercials. So I'm excited about that, man. Gonna have my demo out there, and now I'm going into the animation part where they're now like kind of creating characters for me, and I've got to like come up with their voices. So it's really cool, man. But just juggling that, the 9 to 5, the podcast, man, it's a lot right now.
So how long before we see you in the next Shrek movie, man?
Oh man, that's the goal, bro. Like seriously, to like, so I did this one character they had me did, and my instructor was like, "Oh, I just knocked it out the park." It's like a half wolf, half man, who like kind of went to the dark side, so to speak. So basically, I kind of gave him a voice. Hello, this is my name. I'm Karen. So yeah,
Hey, listen,
so
listen, you figure, if we could see you on one of those Disney movies, those A-listers like Kevin Hart and Chris Rock and so many others, you know, we'll know where you got your start from, man.
oh yeah, man. And if that happens, dude, we're all going to Disney. We're taking all the kids, everybody. It's gonna be like a 200-person trip, man.
Yeah. Hey, listen, man. Trust me, my kids watch enough of that stuff.
You might one day be watching something and be like, wait a minute, is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, man. So yeah, but no, Kitchen Sink podcast still rolling. Wednesdays, 7 p.m. Mountain Time, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Not gonna do a show this Wednesday because I actually am going to like the early premiere for the new Transformers movie. Comes out I think like in a couple of weeks, but I was able to snag some tickets to like some super early release IMAX 3D. They're going to be giving away some swag, so I'm going to be doing that this Wednesday. So that's going to be pretty cool, man. But next Wednesday you can catch me on Kitchen Sink podcast. Check out the YouTube channel. Just put in Kitchen Sink, spelled SYNC, and then you'll find the YouTube page right there.
Listen, there you have it. And Mark, as always, man, I thank you for your time and I thank you for this. And I think, what we discussed right here, this is an important topic to a lot of people because, again, some people might realize it, some people don't, but how much realignment affects a lot of people. Okay. Good and bad. So, like this is important. And I think, and once again, I just thank you for your time, and sharing and contributing to this, man.
Man, I appreciate you for having me. I always appreciate you thinking about me. And, anytime that we kind of collaborate on something. It's always some good sports knowledge being passed around, and it's always entertaining for the viewers to be able to, watch the playback, man.
Listen, definitely, man. And I just want to thank you once again, and take this time as always to thank everybody out there for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. And if you like what you saw and heard on this podcast, please do feel free to like it as well as subscribe to this channel. And if you're on Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it's my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. You can check it out, drop a line, and be a part of one of the better sports debating groups on social media. And also, I'm going to sound like a summer rerun right here, but please feel free to go to that Kitchen Sink channel on YouTube and subscribe. So for Marc Jenkins, my name is William Martin. I'm signing off and saying thanks once again for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Be well, everybody.
Take care.